Hi, this is basically a remake of an older video I made about Overwatch, but with new points added and some things I thought about since then. It's not meant to be a balance breakdown or anything like that, just my overall thoughts of how the game feels now, and what's changed over time. First, I'm going to talk about Hitscan versus projectile, since my opinions remain the same. Overwatch is kind of leaned into Hitscan being more picked, not necessarily because it's always stronger, but because it's more consistent and comfortable. Hitscan always feels very direct when it comes to its mechanical skill, which is why people gravitate towards it. But with projectile heroes, it feels more expressive. You're predicting movement, timing shots, and managing with more than just raw aim, which makes fights, in my opinion, feel more dynamic and engaging. Even looking at win rates, Hitscan isn't necessarily dominating everything. It's just more about what people choose and feels easiest to play. Overall, I think Overwatch feels better when it's more projectile heavy than Hitscan. My next issue is Overwatch kits being too safe, / Overwatch losing its identity. Overwatch kits outside of being Hitscan and projectile feel like they're becoming too safe, almost perfect in a way that removes a lot of the character from them. Some newer heroes, or reworked heroes, feel like they can do a bit of everything without any clear weaknesses. Even when we have some projectile-based heroes, they often play in a very consistent, poke-oriented way, where abilities just add damage and utility without really changing how you approach fights. I'm going to argue with balance here. The biggest issue for me is that it doesn't feel interesting to play. A lot of kits feel forgettable, like they blend together, and I honestly forget that Season 2 was even a new season sometimes, just because the new heroes here didn't stand out. It also feels like some designs fall into the trap of perfect heroes. Instead of having a strong identity or clear trade-offs, they just function smoothly in almost any situation. And when more heroes feel like that, it starts to affect how people feel about the game overall. Even though Overwatch is still a team game, it feels more like 5 or 6, depending on the game mode, separate players instead of a coordinated unit. This also shows up in hero design, not just gameplay, but how heroes are built and even now how they look. Because of that, matches feel out of tempo. People aren't necessarily wrong for playing like they do, but the mindset shifts from how do we win together to everybody else is dragging me down. And that's where a lot of frustration and toxicity start to come from, even when nobody is intentionally throwing. Having heroes that can either do it all, while also still having heroes that can't do enough, the game starts feeling less like a team-based game and more like stacking individual players depending on the mode. Examples that come to mind would be Sierra and Sojourn. Both are technically projectile, but you very much play around their hitscan abilities, with Sojourn's railgun and ult, and then Sierra's auto-locking ability. So it's not just gameplay that feels individual focused, it's the entirety identity of the game, including how the heroes are designed and presented. A lot of newer heroes feel like they follow a similar design direction, like they're built from the same template, just reskinned. It also doesn't feel distinct or stylistically risky as Overwatch designs used to be. And I think that affects how the game feels overall. When heroes don't feel as visually and conceptually unique, it reinforces the idea that everything is becoming more standardized in both gameplay and presentation. The question I have is, should we go back to open queue? A lot of Overwatch players are really well adjusted to role queue now at this point. It's been the default for 4 years now. Anything outside of role queue now gets instantly dismissed or treated as not a real Overwatch or not as competitive. And I think it creates the kind of fear around it, or at least a bias against it. People don't really engage with it as a different way to play the game. They just straw man the same fear of, what if 5 other people insta-lock DPS? Or the fears of it being unbalanced. Role queue is obviously more structured, and that's why more people prefer it. It gives you clear roles, predictable comps, and more defined job in each match. I also think that's exactly why people should try open queue more. Even just casually, it forces you out of the fixed mindset, and you have to think more about team composition on the fly. You have to adapt more often and give situation where team identity actually shifts during the match instead of just staying locked in from the start. It also gives you more freedom to experiment with heroes and comps that don't really fit neatly into strict roles. That can lead to more creative and unexpected moments. I'm not going to argue whether open queue should replace roll queue or that either version is clearly better or not. I just think that open queue should be taken more seriously, and maybe in the future we can get rid of roll queue 5v5 because that is ultimately what's holding queue times back. My next point I'd love to go into is 5v5 or 6v6. The shift to 5v5 changed Overwatch a lot more than people realized. Tanks have to be super tanks to be playable. If they have any weaknesses, it's just literally unplayable. Supports have to act almost like the second tank at times, not in a literal sense, but they have to be super buffed as well. They have to do everything too, because there's one less person to peel, so they become their own peelers and their own damage. DPS may feel more independent, but that makes fights more volatile. With fewer players, one pick can decide everything. In 6v6, fights just feel like they have more breathing room. Tanks can actually peel and hold space properly. Supports aren't constantly having to carry the pressure of one missing person. And DPS can play more with their team instead of just having to be the solo carry. Even the fights themselves feel better, with more interactions happening at once instead of collapsing after one mistake. 6v6 feels like Overwatch's natural team-focused identity. My last point will be about monetization. It feels like Overwatch's focus has shifted more towards skins, bundles, cosmetics than it used to. I get that it's a live service game and needs to make more money, but sometimes it feels like the monetization starts influencing the direction of the game more than it should. A lot of newer heroes or skins design feel like very marketed and standardized. Like they're built to fit a theme or sell a bundle first, and then everything else second. That kind of ties back into feeling like the game is becoming more uniform overall. It doesn't directly affect gameplay, but it does affect how the game feels, and that adds to this idea that Overwatch is losing some of its distinct identity over time. Overwatch feels like it's becoming more about character selling and less about having fun. And all of these point to the same thing for me. Overwatch feels like it's becoming more about consistency, safety, and structure, and less about identity or variety in the gameplay it used to have. And even if it's intentional or necessary for how the game works now, it still changes how it feels to play it.